Many people have probably heard of Cuba Gooding Jr., an actor who once starred in dozens of famous films but had almost completely disappeared from theatrical releases by the late 2000s. Judging by recent events surrounding him, it's unlikely he'll ever return, and even if he does, it'll probably be for a minor role somewhere in the background. Today, let's take a look at the period in Cuba Gooding Jr.'s career when major Hollywood studios forgot his name, forcing him to settle for films that rarely score higher than 4 out of 10 on specialized websites. Cuba's career began with the 1991 film Boys in the Hood. Gooding had appeared in films before, but only in minor roles. In Boys in the Hood, he played one of the leads. The film performed well at the box office and gained cult status in the US. Interestingly, Cuba might not have been in the film at all. He got the role only after Will Smith turned it down, fearing it could hurt his TV show The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. The film was directed by John Singleton, who later worked on Too Fast, Too Furious, Four Brothers, and Shaft. This was his directorial debut. Singleton spent months battling with Sony, which loved the script he had written but wasn't keen on him directing. After much debate, the film's budget was cut by a third, but Singleton finally got the chance to direct it. Thanks to Boys in the Hood, many actors, including Lawrence Fishburne and Morris Chestnut, got their big break alongside Singleton. The film also marked the acting debut of rapper Ice Cube. Throughout the 1990s, Cube's career was on the rise, and he appeared in many well-known films. However, after starring in a few box office flops in the early 2000s, he faded into the background. Boys in the Hood also became the subject of parody in several comedies, such as Don't Be a Menace. The jokes about the father being younger than his son reference Lawrence Fishburne, who played Cuba's father in Boys in the Hood despite being only 7 years older. Regardless, Cuba didn't get lost in the sea of talented actors around him. Although he didn't receive an Oscar nomination like the film's director, producers took notice of him. For his next big role in the film Gladiator, he earned $100,000. The film also starred James Marshall, who was predicted to have a bright future at the time. However, his career never took off, and he quickly faded into obscurity. While Gladiator wasn't a box office hit, Cuba Gooding Jr. received high praise from both critics and audiences. As a result, his paychecks quickly increased, and his roles in major films became more significant. He often had bad luck with the box office performance of his films, but as long as he wasn't the lead, no one paid much attention. In 1993, Cuba starred in Judgment Night, which was plagued by production issues and by the time it finally hit theaters, had lost all buzz. Judgment Night and Freejack derailed Emilio Estevez's career. Like his brother Charlie Sheen, Estevez was on the rise in the late 1980s, but took a nosedive by the mid-1990s. The failure didn't hurt Cuba's career, and his fees continued to rise. His next film, Lightning Jack, also flopped, though most of the criticism was directed at Paul Hogan. Since Cuba only had a supporting role, he remained unscathed. However, for his next film, he asked for a lower fee, and this time, luck was on his side. Wolfgang Petersen's Outbreak performed well at the box office, though Cuba had little to do with its success. After Outbreak, Cuba finally hit it big. Jerry Maguire, starring Cuba Gooding Jr. and Tom Cruise, was a box office hit. Cuba worked hard to land the role, pestering director Cameron Crowe with so many ideas during auditions that Crowe eventually gave in and cast him. Other contenders for the role included Jamie Foxx and Damon Wayans. With a budget of $50 million, Jerry Maguire grossed $273 million and won Cuba an Oscar for Best Supporting Actor. After that, his life started to feel like a fairy tale. After earning $600,000 for Jerry Maguire, his salary skyrocketed to $1.5 million for What Dreams May Come. People compared him to Denzel Washington, while actors like Lawrence Fishburne weren't even considered in the same league. Fishburne never commanded the kind of pay Cuba did. This was the peak of Cuba's career. He chose his roles wisely, often securing lucrative supporting roles. As a result, failures like What Dreams May Come didn't hurt him, while successes like the comedy, As Good as It Gets, only boosted his reputation. The first warning sign came in 1998, when he and Tom Berenger agreed to star in franchise pictures A Murder of Crows. The film was so bad that the studio refused to release it in theaters, sending it straight to video. The exact amount Cuba earned for this film is unknown, but if Franchise Pictures followed its usual practices, he probably made a lot. In 1999, Cuba faced 2 consecutive box office failures. The thriller Instinct and the action film Chill Factor both bombed around the same time, Instinct earned Cuba his highest paycheck to date, $2.5 million. However, since the film starred Anthony Hopkins in the lead role, Cuba once again avoided most of the criticism. As for Chill Factor, starring Cuba Gooding Jr. and Skeet Ulrich, that's a different story. After Scream in 1996, Ulrich was widely praised by critics and flooded with offers. However, Chill Factor dealt a blow to his career from which he couldn't recover. The actor quickly faded into straight-to-video films. But Chill Factor isn't just notable for derailing Skeet Ulrich's career. What's more interesting is its $70 million budget, $10 million more than that of The Matrix, which was released the same year. The film was produced by Morgan Creek Productions, a studio that was behind many big hits in the late 1980s and early 1990s. Their logo's musical cue even became the main theme for Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. However, by the late 1990s, the studio had suffered several setbacks, one of which was Soldier, starring Kurt Russell. Facing financial difficulties, they decided to greenlight the $70 million Chill Factor, hiring first-time director Hugh Johnson. At the time, Hugh had only worked as a cinematographer on a few films, including Ridley Scott's White Squall and G.I. Jane. The lead roles in the film went to Cuba Gooding Jr. and Skeet Ulrich. The exact amounts they were paid remain unknown, but given the Chill Factor doesn't even look like it cost $30 million, they most likely walked away with substantial paychecks. There is little information about the film's finances, but in the early 2000s, Morgan Creek frequently collaborated with Franchise Pictures, a studio notorious for shady financial dealings. Morgan Creek also helped produce films like Battlefield Earth and The Art of War. There's a small chance that Chill Factor was another A Sound of Thunder, only made by Morgan Creek instead of Franchise Pictures. The film was a massive failure at the box office. With a budget of $70 million, it only grossed $11 million. That put it among the top 5 biggest flops of the year. Cuba was somewhat redeemed by Men of Honor, where he played a supporting role. While the film didn't perform well financially, audiences and critics responded positively, which helped salvage his reputation. After Men of Honor, he appeared in Michael Bay's Pearl Harbor, where his character skillfully shot down a few Japanese planes. Audiences once again started to recognize and praise Cuba. If he had stayed in supporting roles, his career might have turned out differently. But like most actors, he wanted to move up and become the next Denzel Washington, or at least Wesley Snipes. So, in the early 2000s, Cuba decided he was a big enough star to carry a Hollywood film on his own. His first attempt was successful. With a $30 million budget, the comedy Snow Dogs grossed $115 million worldwide. Believing he had great comedic talent, he started taking on all kinds of comedy roles, paying little attention to scripts. The only thing he cared about was his paycheck getting bigger. Naturally, what was bound to happen, happened. These films started flopping. First, Boat Trip bombed, earning him a Golden Raspberry nomination. Then came the even bigger failure of The Fighting Temptations, a comedy with an even larger budget. Realizing his mistake, Cuba took on the lead role in the action film Endgame. But the film was so bad that the studio decided not to risk a theatrical release, and the $20 million project went straight to video. His last attempt to stay afloat was the 2007 comedy Daddy Day Camp. However, with a budget of $35 million, it only managed to gross $18 million. From 2003 to 2007, Cuba Gooding Jr. failed with 7 films in a row. Even Radio, which was praised by both critics and audiences, couldn't turn things around. Once studios realized audiences weren't interested in Cuba anymore, they stopped offering him theatrical releases. The best he could get were supporting roles in films like The Butler and Machete Kills. After 2010, he only took lead roles in films like Sacrifice, The Way of War, Bayou Caviar, and The Hit List, starring alongside other faded stars like Christian Slater. Judging by their ratings, the films weren't much better than the low-budget action movies Bruce Willis and Nicolas Cage started churning out. They all went straight to video, and their budgets could probably fit inside a small chocolate box. Perhaps Cuba could have avoided this decline. Not every actor successfully transitions to leading roles, and not everyone gets involved in questionable projects that offer suspiciously high salaries. These days, Cuba is constantly in court. Several women have accused him of harassment. Gooding insists that all of these allegations are false, and just attempts to profit off his name. But that's not the worst of it. The actor was also accused of rape. While the initial charges could have landed him up to a year in prison, the rape accusation was much more serious. While the full consequences of these legal battles remain to be seen, they have effectively ended any chance of a Hollywood comeback. With such a baggage of problems, any hopes of a career revival or rising from the ashes are out of the question for Cuba. Age is also taking its toll, so even without the legal situation, he probably wouldn't have been able to return to the industry anyway. Thanks for watching, subscribe, and stay tuned.